Thanks again for joining us on AWB. I'm your host with the most, Abhijit Webb. Today we focus our attention towards globalization, hurting Canadians. But first, we have a special guest in our studios tonight. He goes by the name of Jeff. Jeff has a special opportunity of playing Settlers of Catan. And he'll give us more insight as to what it was like. Everyone, can we have a big round of applause for Jeff? Hello, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm good.
So, can you tell us a bit more about how Settlers of Catan was like? Sure thing. Playing Settlers of Catan was not only a fun experience, but it also got very competitive and gave me an insight as to why countries trade and make trade agreements with each other in the first place. With all due respect to the game, it is nowhere as complex as international trade is in the real world. However, many of the situations dealt with in the game can be comparable to real-life examples. So, let's begin by imagining each player acting as its own country. Depending on where each player places its settlements, they get the resources for that settlement. Although most countries would want to get an equal amount of all four resources in the game, the odds of rolling, the number on which you put your settlement, and the rule that each settlement has to be 2 roads apart from each other, whether it be your country's or another, an equal distribution of all 4 resources. Building roads, placing settlements, or towns all require certain resources. And because unlike in the real world, wars cannot be fought over these resources or the land, the only option remaining is interdependence. Countries have to trade with one another in order to fulfill their needs to expand, to grow their countries. In the real world, countries trade to grow economically in most cases. However, the real world is not a perfect one, which means things such as trading will not always go the way you want them to go, and things are not always fair to all parties of the trade. This was seen on our last day of Settlers of Catan, when many changes to the game took place, the first of which being the new free trade agreement between Red and Blue. This meant that both of these countries did not have to wait until their turns in order to make trades. This is comparable to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, set back in 1993, in which Mexico, the US, as well as Canada can trade anytime they want without tariffs or taxes. This helped international businesses within the continent, but did not help businesses outside of the continent wanting to trade within. These other countries that were affected were comparable to how white and orange had to wait their turn in order to make trades. Another addition to the game that was seen on the third day was the ability to trade 4 sheep for any resources in the game. This was in order to replenish the available sheep in the game. This is similar to how the discovery of oil in the Middle East. Ignoring all the wars that happened in the Middle East, other countries all over the world started trading almost anything in order to get some of that oil. I predict a similar fate for Canada. In the coming decades, as water starts to become another global tradable commodity, countries from all around the world will come to trade our water as we have such an abundant supply of it. Finally, the trade sanctions that were applied on certain countries, making them unable to trade any of their resources, and also had their turn skipped for 2 rounds of the game. This was comparable to sanctions that were placed on Russia after attacking the Ukraine. According to the BBC News report, How Far Do the EU and US Sanctions Go on Russia, dated in 2014, the sanctions opposed were smart sanctions, designed to blacklist certain officials in Putin's inner circle and also financially restrict many of the major companies within Russia. Applying normal sanctions that in most cases hurt the people of the country, smart sanctions are a far better option. And Russia's Prime Minister states that these sanctions had an economic loss of billions of dollars in Russia. These sanctions forced Putin to eventually comply with international authorities over the recent conflicts in Ukraine. Overall, Settlers of Catan has helped me understand that although development of countries both in size and economics can happen on their own, it is much more easier when international trade and globalization are involved. Thanks. That was a great insight to Settlers of Catan. Truly sounds like a game that I should be playing myself. Next, we have Peter Johnson, who will be talking to us more about globalization and international trade and how it's helping or hurting Canadians. Over to you, Peter. Hello, Abhijit. First, let's talk about the positive effects of globalization and international trading on Canada and Canadians. Let's start by looking at Canada's secondary industry. Now, because Canada does not have a large secondary industry, most of the products that we as consumers want and need are not made in Canada, therefore having to be imported from other countries. An example of this is GM cars having to be imported from the USA. Now, because of Canada's climate, many of the fruits and vegetables that we want to grow in Canada are also not available. And because of NAFTA, we are able to trade them through Mexico. Now let's take a look at how international trading and globalization helps local businesses within Canada. Local businesses now have the ability to not just sell in Canada, but to sell their products anywhere around the world, increasing their profits and growing their businesses, which in turn increases the amount of jobs available within Canada. Another way this helps local businesses is that local businesses are now able to buy their inventory at a much cheaper price from places where labor is much cheaper, such as China. Investment is also impacted from globalization and international trading because corporations and people outside of Canada can now invest into Canada through portfolio or foreign direct investments. This works the other way around as well. Canadians are also allowed to invest into other countries. This makes their investments much more safer as they're not all in one congregated area, and it also opens up many more investment opportunities around the world. International trading and globalization also increase the ties between countries. Because Canada and America rely so heavily on each other and trade so heavily with each other, Canada is protected by the USA. Because many countries from all around the world are allowed to work together and many versions of the same product are made, quality for that product generally increases. Finally, globalization and global trading have made multinational corporations, or companies that are known worldwide, whether it's in Canada, China, India, Mexico, or the USA. Everyone knows about McDonald's, Apple, Microsoft, or Google. Now let's take a look at some of the downsides of globalization and international trading. According to Global Affairs Canada, Canada's State of Trade 2014, more than 50% of businesses within Canada are international businesses and not Canadian. More than half of these are tertiary businesses. Now, what this means is that when you buy a product for, let's say, Walmart, the revenue that Walmart makes is not going to the Canadian government. Instead, it's going back to its home country, which in this case is the USA. This means that Canada's GDP is not increasing. And because Canada's GDP is not increasing, it's making the value of the dollar decrease. The low Canadian dollar will restrict Canadians from traveling to other countries because of the low currency conversion rates. It would also have a negative impact on importers, as it would become way too expensive to import from other countries. Having 50% of our businesses non-Canadian, it means that whenever a business pulls out of Canada, Canadians will lose their jobs. And because they're international businesses, they don't really care about Canadian jobs and can pull out any time. This was similar to how Target recently pulled out of Canada, and many jobs were lost. International trade restricts the growth of secondary industries in Canada, as Canadians are simply importing from other countries. This also creates a Canadian trade deficit when we import more than we export. Finally, international trading and globalization hurts local businesses as it makes more competitions for them, as consumers can simply buy from a US company instead of a local Canadian company. That was all, folks, for this segment. Now let's bring the conversation back to Abhijit. Back to you. Stay tuned and remember to join us next week on AWB.